since it will be presented in English. Today's workshop will also be accessible in American Sign Language. So if you would like to use this accommodation, feel free to pin the ASL interpreter that appears on the screen. And in order to activate the Zoom interpretation, if you would like to listen in Spanish, if you're connecting from a computer, at the bottom right-hand corner, please click on the globe that says interpretation. There you can choose the language that you prefer, and that is all. If you are joining the meeting from a phone, it's a little bit different. When you tap your phone screen, when you have the Zoom meeting open, at the bottom right-hand corner, please tap the three little dots that say more. There you choose language interpretation, and there you choose the language that you prefer. And then at the top right, please tap done. I am also pasting these instructions in the chat. And if you have any issues or any questions about interpretation, please let us know in the chat and we'll be happy to support you. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Without further ado, we will dive in. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about a project that started early last year, and excited to share some upcoming opportunities and even today opportunities to bring you into the process to participate in what we hope will bring us closer to achieving climate justice in Miami-Dade County. So this project has taken on a lot of different names: the Climate Justice Accountability Initiative. It's been also called the Climate Justice Engagement Project. But it really started as a priority and a concern that we were hearing as Catalyst Miami from our partners throughout the Miami Climate Alliance, who are different organizations, neighborhood groups, and just residents who are concerned about climate change, who are concerned about climate injustice, and who are working in different and creative ways to address climate injustice in the community. And it was this concern about more and more wonderful, ambitious climate and energy policies and commitments, but little public engagement once those commitments were made. And knowing the importance of community engagement and being able to, I'm going to follow the waiting room while I speak, sorry about that. Being able to bring people into the process as these commitments and important ambitious policies are pursued would be crucial to ensure just outcomes and inclusive outcomes and meaningful outcomes for the people who are impacted by the climate policies and the energy commitments and such. And so we started doing one-on-ones with community leaders throughout Miami-Dade, and then aligned work across the United States, because this isn't something that we are only experiencing. Climate change and ambitious climate policy is something that we're seeing becoming a priority and just moving very quickly in municipalities across the nation and really around the world. And from those conversations, we learned about the importance and also how there's meaningful impact when you lead participatory policymaking and evaluation processes. And what that looks like is, in simple terms, bringing people in to the process that we can usually have siloed away in government. So centering people and their insights and their leadership in being able to design the policies that shape the solutions in their communities, and bringing them in to be able to set the priorities and work on the evaluations that determine how we evaluate progress, right? It's hard to use a word other than evaluation, but when we look at these policies, we look at these changes that were enacted, and we try to identify what positive outcomes, what unintended consequences, right, came out of that community members themselves are able to participate in shaping those priorities, right, and how we define progress. And so the first main phase was really around shared accountability, and we used these two tools that you see on the screen, which were created by a lot of experts who actually convened in Miami in 2019 around this idea of shared accountability, which referred to, in simple terms, doing what you say you're going to do, right? And so if we say we're going to address climate change, and if we say we're going to make it beneficial for the community, then how are we going to go about following through on that? Right, as a collective, as a community, as civilians, as residents, as organizations, as government, right? How are we going to be accountable to that? And then also thinking about actually creating relationships between community members and government in a way that can be trusted and in a way that is ultimately able to be a part of this evaluation process, right? Where we're working together over time, and people have access to transparent and trustworthy information to be able to guide these evaluations. And the framework is very simply just a chart where we convened a group of what we called our co-initiators to think about ways, and these co-initiators were community leaders from across Miami-Dade, to think about ways that we could use. I'm going to ask folks to be mindful of their mics, especially for the interpreters, just to make sure that it's clear when I'm speaking. If you're not speaking and you could stay on mute, that would be an excellent help. Thank you very much. So we convened these co-initiators, community leaders from across the county to start really tangibly thinking about ways to do all the things I just described, right? Because they all kind of sound good, but they came together to talk about goals, talk about a purpose and an actual structure internal to the county government, what its responsibilities and duties would be, what that membership would look like if we're really prioritizing insights from our frontline neighborhoods that are most impacted by climate change and all of the related harms. And a series of one-on-ones with all of those co-initiators, right? Experts on environmental justice, on inclusion and accessibility, on these types of shared accountability processes in local government, and working on that model, right? And so now we're excited to be kicking off this next phase. And as we're bringing more folks in, as we are developing the project, I wanted to take a step back and also share some lessons that we've learned so far, because they'll be crucial as we go on this next phase. And on the screen, I have some little testimonies, some little quotes from the end of that process and some of the key participants, and kind of their reflections on what that was like. One county staff member that was a part of it noted that there was no assumption that the process was done after that phase and that there was still a lot of work to do. One of our co-facilitators just talked about how much they learned in the process itself about building community, about leveraging the framework, which, like I mentioned, was just this chart, but really could be an empowering chart if it was implemented and used in a way that really centered community leadership. And how this project was unique, because oftentimes when we're responding to climate change and thinking of ways to adapt and prevent the most severe consequences, we feel reactive, but this was really a proactive initiative. Another participant, one of our co-initiators, talked about how they were grateful for the openness and the atmosphere that was created in that space where we endeavored to practice collaborative governance to really allow for very different and new ideas and contributions to be made. And as noted by another member of the county staff who was involved, really everybody in that space needed to be devoted to the work. And it was something we were all grateful for, because that commitment, that engagement, that vulnerability was necessary for us to be able to make meaningful progress in those conversations. So from this process, I just want to highlight a couple lessons. Number one was that local systems are really complex. Sometimes when we think about localizing things, bringing them closer to home, seems like they may be getting simpler. And there are many things that we share in common, many things as you get down to the local level that may become a little bit more efficient, maybe a little bit simpler, but each community's power structures, each community's ways of adapting to climate change, since that's what we're really focusing on, are going to be different. So there's no complete manual for just solutions that work best in every community. Local government is complex, local neighborhood networks are complex, right? Our ideas of resilience and our priorities locally are different and diverse, and that's part of what's beautiful, right? But understanding that is very important. And so that brought us to another lesson, another kind of important highlight of our project, which was that deep collaboration is really important. And we often called this co-creation, right? So creating things collaboratively together, whether they were ideas or solutions, or even measures that could be enacted through policy. And all of that co-creation process really starts with how we identify challenges. Residents in Miami-Dade dealing with climate change at the same time as they're dealing with the rising cost of living are asking very important and pressing questions about how and whether we can continue to live in this place in a way that people can thrive in a fair and inclusive way. And if so, how? How are they going to be able to do those things? And in order to answer these more difficult questions, another thing that really stood out from our process, a lesson learned, was that we need to recognize power dynamics and work to shift power fairly in order to be able to answer those questions fairly. Climate justice, responding to climate change in a way that in the process and in the outcomes centers justice and restores a lot of historic harm that through the energy system, through the way that we've created climate change, through the way that the government is working, right? If we're thinking about policies, that we can create beneficial outcomes for those who've been harmed. It requires an understanding of the power dynamics, right? And the willingness to share and distribute power where it's necessary to achieve those just outcomes. And in this project particularly, in sharing power, we sought to create pathways for more community participation in government. Not just any kind of participation, but meaningful participation, right? Often you may have heard the question or the sort of saying, who has a seat at the table, right? In this project, we're asking questions like, how many tables are there? And who defines how you behave at the table? And how might that be different from those who've been sitting at the decision-making table for months or years or even generations, right? Who defines who you bring into the table and what you decide when you're there? All of those types of questions beyond who has a seat. And the last one is that change takes time, right? Because building trusted and sustainable relationships between community members and government requires unraveling histories of exclusion and harm that have created the conditions that we're trying to deal with and that we're trying to address collectively. And the collaborative governance, the participatory evaluation, all of those kind of methods are ways to begin doing so by having community-led conversations and making clear space for those in power to respond with action.
Excuse me, this is the interpreter. Can you please slow down?
Yes, thanks for the reminder.
So much.
Sometimes I pick up a little bit. Sorry about that. Ultimately, shared accountability, this process, the goals, it's not going to be achieved on a one-way street. It's also not just advocates asking for something or residents expressing a concern about one thing. And it's not government just listening. These conversations require for people to be more vulnerable, to ask difficult questions of others and of themselves, and to work towards a sense of shared understanding and deeper transparency. And that's because each collaborator has to understand their responsibility to give and to take and to respond in a way that's just within the project and outside of it, right? So it's asking much deeper questions as we think about creating climate policy. So phase 2, without further ado, this next phase that we're launching with this workshop, we're gonna call it the Climate Justice Engagement Workshop Series. And it's going to be a series of workshops throughout the next few months for partners of the Miami Climate Alliance and Miami-Dade County staff to work on collaborative governance. And specifically, they're going to be working on a couple of things together. One is developing a shared understanding of the different levels of public engagement and public participation, and I'll introduce those in just a moment. And also setting goals for public engagement. with that group of collaborators and thinking about avenues and an entity for this meaningful community engagement to actually be achieved, right? So how can they implement these things that we come to a consensus on, that we believe will be meaningful for our communities? And then also just generally strategies to make engagements over the long term accessible and also empowering, right? Thinking about ways that we can give and redistribute power and center the leadership and the insights of community members in the policymaking, the evaluation process, right? All of these different stages. So this is the levels of public participation I was talking about: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. So we're going to be diving into each of those. And the purpose of today's workshop is because we have an excellent team of collaborators, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you. This is going to be your chance to get to engage with the collaborators, which include county staff, which include some of our excellent partners, different organizations and residents doing incredible work in their communities. I'll slow down again, yes.
Apologies, Natalia, can you please slow down a little bit?
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Yes. So the team of collaborators includes county staff, it includes community leaders who are doing excellent work in their communities to respond to climate change in creative and justice-centered ways, and also partner organizations who are doing the same at the neighborhood level. And so we have that team of collaborators. Part of the purpose of today is for you to get to meet them, to talk to them a little bit, to share your insights, but also because you know, we know that we don't speak for the entire community, and we wanted to also use this process to practice broader community engagement, broader public participation in the project itself. And talk about some of these questions. So these are the questions that we're going to be diving into each workshop at each level of engagement. How is the county engaging the public, you know, through information, through consultation, through involvement, through collaboration? And how is the county engaging the public in a way that can be empowering? What are the outcomes of those things as defined by community leaders? And what are the outcomes as defined by county staff? And then coming, like I said, to that shared understanding. And then what commitments can the county make to achieve meaningful engagement? Like I talked about, those strategies to be more inclusive, to be more accessible at each level of public participation and empowering, ultimately. So today, like I mentioned, our purpose is going to be to meet the collaborators. Shortly, I'm going to sort everyone into breakout rooms and invite you to just have an honest conversation. We have some awesome breakout room leaders who are going to remind you of these questions. We're going to talk about how you've engaged with the county in the past. It could be something as simple as an email, or just I follow them on social media, and so I see their tweets, or I see their Instagram posts, or I get their flyers in the mail. It could be if you've attended events, maybe you've been to a meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, or you've been to a public forum or like meeting of some sort around maybe the Thrive 305 strategy last year, or something else, right? So you could talk about any of these kind of engagements that you've had with the county or reflect on them. And then we also want to talk about from those engagements and also just envisioning what is possible, right? It doesn't have to be based on something that you've experienced with government. It could be an engagement elsewhere that you think this ultimately would be very empowering for myself. It would be really meaningful in driving action, or it would be really, really relevant to my community and some things that we are experiencing. So thinking about these questions in your groups, also just getting to meet folks, talk to folks about this work, and encourage you to stay in touch with our collaborators throughout the process if you're interested in being more involved. And that's it.